What is happening, everybody? Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jeremy Lord, and we are doing a first of a four-part stream today on basically kind of all the basics of digital drawing. So today we're going to talk a little bit about sketching and referencing. Next week we're going to go into inking, then we'll talk about color, and then we'll talk about kind of inspiration and all that kind of stuff. So first part today is going to be sort of basic things. We're going to look at a few different ways of approaching a sketch. If you've just joined us and you're kind of getting into it, so we do have a chat. As much as possible, put in all your questions in chat. I love to get all your questions, love to kind of go through and answer those if you have any. Don't necessarily even have to be related to this. Big fan of gaming, so if you guys want to get into that too, that can always be super fun to go. I can talk and draw at the same time. But yeah, thanks for joining us. And without further ado, let's get stuck straight into this. So obviously, I am working in Photoshop, and I am using a Wacom Cintiq. So Wacom Cintiq, for those of you guys who don't know, is just basically like a pen. Allows me to use basically draw as if it was a pen rather than using a mouse. There's a few different things. The mouse feels a bit uncomfortable and clunky to draw with, but also doesn't have necessarily all the features and availabilities that a Wacom or similar kind of product will have. So those are the two main things that I would say that if you're kind of looking to doing a lot of sketching and digital drawing, you're probably going to have to get a Cintiq or some sort of drawing tablet to suit your budget. But using a mouse, again, probably not the best thing. And you'll see why in a sec. So first things first is how do you even kind of get started into the actual drawing of the image itself? We're going to look at two different ways there. The first one is kind of something that I sometimes have a little bit of fun with. Generally not something that I would recommend if you are working to a brief, because it's a bit looser. And that is basically this idea of if you're kind of stuck for any kind of what to draw, how to draw it, you can kind of do a big kind of scribble like this and just go a little bit nuts, just be a bit random, doing these kind of blocks in here. And we could even throw in a different color if we wanted to, just to get some more kind of different kind of ideas happening potentially. And there we go. So I've done this very, very kind of rough sketch. And effectively what I'm going to do now is I'm going to basically play a game of like Mr. Scribble, if you're familiar with that game. And just kind of look for shapes in here and go, all right, well, potentially you could even just rotate this if we're stuck for something to do and how that could work. Trying to figure out kind of what's the best way to kind of approach this and where we're going to go with this. So I might just kind of stick with this and see where this takes me. So I'm kind of seeing usually when this happens, I tend to end up with some sort of robot or machine or something, simply because, yeah, that's just kind of that's a big part of what I will do. But also, vast array of different kind of machines and things that you could do. So this is always kind of one of those default potential options that will happen, and kind of seeing where that's going to take me. So there we go. We're kind of working to this, getting some basic kind of ideas happening. Something sticking out of here could be some big laser gun or something. And maybe it's got some tubes coming out of it. Again, I really have no idea what I'm doing at this stage, aside from a loose kind of thought of hey, this is going to be some sort of robot, and it's going to help me kind of draw something in that potentially I wouldn't have done if I was kind of setting out from the onset to do this. So again, you can see, this is a little bit kind of weird and it's not what I would normally draw, but that's kind of the point. It gets you unstuck in terms of what you can think of doing. So if you can't necessarily think of doing anything that you would normally do, this is a really good way for you to yeah, just to have some fun, do something potentially a little bit different, see where it kind of takes you, and just go a little bit crazy with everything. So Joanna, yeah, similar idea to reverse coloring in, I guess so. Yeah, like it basically kind of you want the randomness is the main thing. You want something to happen that, if you're struggling with making that thing happen, then any kind of process that might help kind of make decisions for you is definitely going to be super helpful with something like this. So there's a range of different digital artists that I follow that kind of have different levels of doing this, and kind of taking it into their world. Obviously, you're going to be doing something that's kind of familiar to what you would normally do. So I mean by that is kind of like it's going to be in the realm that you would kind of normally draw. So it's not going to be completely random, but it's a good way, again, to just get ideas going and get some kind of something on paper that you can then, or paper or like screen in this case, that you can actually kind of start working with, and see kind of where that goes. So I'm actually pretty happy with this. There's something like kind of interesting going on here. Then I can start to kind of, once I've got something down, I can start thinking about, all right, cool, let's actually make this not random, and make it actually into a thing, because now I can actually see shapes happening, and I can start actually drawing something that has like an intention and like an end goal to it, rather than just super random kind of scribbles that don't necessarily go anywhere. Yeah. Right. So looking pretty good. Can start, can spend a pretty decent amount of time doing this personally. Digital is fantastic for kind of exploring stuff. Sorry, explorating stuff. New word. But it can also be a little bit tricky, because at the end of the day, you're also trying to actually draw something and you want to get something done. And, constantly exploring, it is cool, but it can also mean that you don't actually end up with anything on the page by the end of it. And that's not great, because that's exactly what you're trying to do in the first place. All right. Got some weird spaceship thing that originated from this like weird little scribble. So that's basically kind of your first approach to this. If you're like, I don't know what to draw, where do I begin? We'll start with kind of something like this, and you can, get something on the screen pretty quickly, and then kind of take it from there and see where you go. But as I said, not awesome if you're kind of thinking about kind of working to a brief, right? So if you've got a client, if you've got a commission of somebody who said, I want specifically this, like I want a person riding a skateboard, or I want like a robot holding a giant sword or whatever, like doing something like this might not be super conducive to you being able to get to that kind of delivery and that commission in a fashionable way. So what we're going to be doing then is we're going to be looking at kind of drawing from reference. And one of the big things that I get asked a lot is, what's the difference in between inspiration and reference? So basically, inspiration, I tend to kind of say that's comes first, and then that then leads into you getting reference. Right? So first you get inspiration of like, hey, what can I do? This is making me think of this kind of stuff. And then you get reference to go like, all right, I'm going to draw a panda riding a bicycle, what does a panda look like? What does a bicycle look like? Those are going to be in the realm of reference. You're going to go online, you're going to go into Google Images or whatever, and you're going to find pictures of pandas, you're going to find pictures of bicycles, and you're going to use those as reference. Like, this is how you draw the thing. So reference in that sense is a lot more kind of tangible. It's a lot more kind of materialistic in that way of just like, it's a thing that exists that you're learning to use to draw something in particular. Inspiration is a little bit looser than that. It's a bit more organic, whereby you're going to be kind of trying to find ideas and things to draw from that you may or may not have yet. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at reference. And so I've pulled in this image, little photo that I took of a little kind of Demon Slayer figurine. And we're going to use this photo as reference for a pose. Now, we might not necessarily be drawing exactly this character, but this is a really good way to get a pose going and get reference to like, all right, this is how a body behaves when it's doing this thing that I'm trying to do. And often when I'm, working like this, I will actually use maybe like an entire pose or parts of a pose to get something going. So for instance, I might just like the top of the body here, but not the legs. I can change the legs later, but we're using bits and pieces of referencing. And so how this works is pretty simple. There's an easy way and there's a slightly more challenging way to do this. I'll start with the easy way. So I'm going to change my brush here to a blue, or any color really that I can see above this photo, because I'm literally going to trace this image so you can kind of see how blocks work and how this technique of like blocking out will kind of impact your drawing, right? And you've probably seen this before. This is a pretty classic way of doing things. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to make basic shapes so that we don't have to worry too much about how stuff looks just yet, right? And proportions and everything. Trying to get very, very simple lines going before we start to add details in. So here we go, we get the neck in. And doing this on the photo is definitely the easier way to do this, because you can really start to kind of see where stuff might go. And again, I'm literally just doing blocks here. So the head is going to be this kind of like tallish rectangle. Trying to think about it like if you were doing a video game in the 80s and you just had like, it's like the world's first 3D game. A head is probably just going to be this box. And then a torso is going to be same thing. It's going to be a different, like slightly flatter, taller kind of box. Neck will just be this kind of cylinder. So we're talking cylinders and boxes everywhere, trying to get basic shapes of stuff in 3D and in perspective made a whole lot easier. And this guy's neck, his head is not really exactly in the middle of his torso. So we'll just move that over, fix him a little bit. Okay. And then same again, we can start to look at like the hips, and that's going to be another kind of block. Some people draw your kind of traditional, like if you're thinking of like underwear kind of thing, they'll draw this shape instead to draw the kind of the hips. But again, same idea. We're just drawing kind of blocky stuff that then, legs can come off of and go into knees, and then another cylinder, and so on and so forth. So it's really all about just kind of very simply articulating kind of like a stick figure, if you will, trying to get that kind of going, right? So that's basically what we're doing here. And as I said, the easy way to do this is just to do this straight onto our little kind of reference photo here, just to make sure that we're getting all the right kind of moves down and the right kind of pose happening. So there we go. And we got a hand. And I'm not too worried about all the rest of the detail at this stage. If I want, I can kind of draw a little bit more lightly and draw the back of the other shoulder that's hidden. And that will give me a starting point for the other arm, that back arm that's kind of swinging that sword will start from back there. So again, that can be just a handy thing to do, to have that in there to show kind of like what's happening in stuff that I can't see just yet. It will be handy a little bit later on to kind of see how all this kind of looks. And then we got our cylinders. So leg number one, cylinder number one, you got a knee, just draw a ball. It's like, if you can imagine, like you're trying to draw, like if you've ever had one of those little kind of toy mannequins, often what they'll do is they'll put like there's like a sphere that joins the articulation of that, right? So that can kind of move either way. And inside that, it's just kind of like a little kind of sphere that you can kind of see. Basically, we're doing the same thing here. We're just kind of putting circles where knees and elbows go, and then the rest is just kind of cylinders that kind of stem from that. And then the foot, super easy, triangle, like so, and then rotate that in 3D. So we're going to get like, I think almost like a cheese wedge, I guess, would be the best way to describe it. So if you can think of like a Swiss cheese wedge, like something like this, that's basically kind of what we're doing. Trying to figure out like simple and easy ways to do this. So we can go in and find where that perspective is going. And then same thing over here, we've got a slight bend on the foot so we can kind of warp that a bit. And then the wedge just goes up from over there. And then this leg comes out to roughly about here. And then a second cylinder. And what we've got is we're left with this, I do need to put that hand in as well. We've got a pretty good understanding of how that pose now kind of works, right? We've got a good amount of volume, and we've got some kind of action happening. It's all kind of working pretty well at this stage. And so we're ready to kind of build on this. And that's one of the key things when we're kind of doing this, is you want to think about it as building on top of things. And this is not necessarily just digital drawing stuff, right? This is really like fundamental drawing things that we're kind of talking about here, yeah? So from here, it's just kind of like this idea of this, right? Like, let's say you're building a house, and you are like, you want to basically kind of start with this kind of framework. And you'll see this when, you know, you see any kind of work site, you'll see this kind of stuff happening where it's like a bunch of planks, a bunch of wood everywhere in an empty space. And then the wiring goes in, and then the paint goes in, and then the decoration. Like, you want to do that first. You want to make sure that your house is standing upright, isn't going to crumble, before you start hanging paintings on walls. If you don't, then you're going to spend a lot of time and money potentially buying paintings and images, and then 2 days later your house is going to fall apart because the foundations of it are not right. So that's what's really crucial at this stage, trying to get this idea going, right? So as I said, we've done this the easy way, kind of tracing over this. Tracing is probably fine when we're doing this, but at the same time, what we can do is we can think about, like, maybe we want to edit this pose a little bit. Maybe we want to make this a little bit kind of a slightly different pose, maybe. You know, maybe his head is not like looking the same way as the pose. This is just, again, this is reference. It's not like, here's what you're drawing, right? So then we can kind of start thinking about doing this kind of a little bit more freehand and thinking about how that's going to then impact our kind of drawing, right? So similar kind of idea, and getting the same kind of overall kind of pose down, but thinking about how it all kind of works together, and how it's all going to come along. So we're getting the same kind of pose happening, but maybe this like sword arm over here, I don't want it to be there. I want it to be like coming out at us or something, right? So we're going to start again with this basic idea of seeing where the rest of that kind of torso lies. And then going from there, we can start to think about where that arm is going to come from. So that arm is going to come out of us. And this is where cylinders is going to be a lot easier to kind of understand, right? So we've got a cylinder happening, but a cylinder in perspective is a lot easier to draw. So we're basically going to have something like this. And then it does that, right? So basically looking at what's called foreshortening, which is when, like, if I stick my arm out at you, you're going to get this sense of foreshortening of like upper arm, forearm, and then hand. So we're going to try and kind of do that same thing. So, whoop, cylinder, second cylinder coming straight out at us. And then again, we're forcing the perspective here, but that's kind of what we're trying to do. And then we can draw a basic sense of like a hand happening. We'll get to hands in a sec. Hands are a whole thing in and of themselves, but effectively what we've done is we've kind of fixed or edited that pose, not necessarily fixed because there's nothing wrong with it to begin with, but editing the pose to make it a little bit more kind of suiting our needs, and then getting the rest of that kind of pose down. And these kind of things can be kind of useful as well, because it means potentially like, let's say again, I want him to look like he's kind of jumping. So we're going to do that leg down here coming out over there, and then that's going to go in perspective over there, and then that foot's going to be at an angle. But then the other leg is potentially going to like be jumping out, and we'll get that kind of anime thing where we don't draw the entire foot, and it's just these kind of like string of lines that make it look like he's kind of like jumping out at us, right? So there's a bunch of different things that we could do again with this idea of, you know, making basic kind of blocks. And you can go online and find, you know, if you're trying to draw, like I said, if you're trying to draw somebody playing volleyball, just find a bunch of pictures and pose references of people playing volleyball, and you can start to think about, like, I can do one just, you know, from kind of like memory even. Usually I would say try and avoid doing things from memory unless it's something that you absolutely know for sure that looks like this. Drawing from memory, I think, always instills a false sense of like, I know what I'm doing, and maybe you do, but maybe there's a better way to do the thing that you're doing. And so, yeah, it's always advisable, I think, to go and get reference on stuff, because it just means that you're going to get a lot more like reality, I guess, into your drawing. It's going to look a lot better. And so here you go. I'm trying to do somebody playing volleyball and like doing a spike or whatever. And it's like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where the arms are going. And it just looks like he's being drawn and quartered. Bad. Just not really what I was hoping for. But again, you can see how quickly I'm getting the kind of the basic foundations of that drawing down. All right. Let's go back to our original kind of drawing here and how that kind of looks. I'll draw in the rest of the sword here just to get the shape right and the angle right. And then we're pretty good. And I'm going to move that over to here. All right. So what I might do now is I could start to kind of edit this pose. And one of my favorite ways to edit a pose is to go in and liquefy that drawing. And kind of basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the same drawing, but I'm going to start to maybe potentially kind of edit some things to show kind of how everything is working. So maybe I thought, oh, his elbow is a bit down too much, but I don't want to redraw the whole arm. So I could maybe kind of move the elbow up a little bit, and you can see it's warping and distorting things, but that's okay. I can fix those a little bit later on. There's no worries there. And it just means that I can potentially like really start to emphasize the kind of the dynamics of the pose to get this kind of idea. So you can see kind of how that looks if I turn it on and off, and how that's going to kind of work. So that will be something that I will definitely kind of consider doing. Another quick edit that I can do at this stage, because I don't have too much work involved into this, is to use selections and rotations. So let's say I want the leg to be out a little bit more. I can make a selection on that leg, and then I can move the anchor point of that leg to kind of like basically where the hip is. And what that will do is it will kind of move that leg. It's almost like a puppet, basically, like trying to work that in there to get this sense of like, where can I put this leg? Where does it kind of best suit? Maybe I want that leg to be bigger because I don't know, I'm trying to do like a perspective kind of warp thing. So there's again, a bunch of different ways that I can edit this to suit what I'm doing without kind of breaking the entire drawing, right? So sword can go back here, can be like swung out a bit more. There's again, really like sky's the limit here in terms of what you can do at this stage. But again, important to do this before you start kind of doing the decoration of this, because it will mean that, you know, if the foundation of your drawing is strong, you're good. You're good for whatever happens will look okay. What you want to avoid at all costs is like getting, you know, an hour and a half into the drawing and go like, something's not right, but you've already done so much of this drawing, you don't want to fix it. And in a lot of cases, you might not even know what to do to fix it, because you're like, something's not right, but I'm not sure how to fix it. Is it the head's too small? Is it the arms too big? Like that generally can be very tricky to get that, you know, like pinpoint where the issue is coming from. So again, really important, make sure you know, you're doing your work right and everything is looking kind of good before you start adding detail. So I'm just going to add in a sword here with a different color, because what I want is to make sure that the sword feels nice and solid and is a good continuation of itself. So drawing that in a different color just means that I can see it a little bit better, and it just means that it's connecting with the arm a little bit more, right? So again, I'm just trying to make sure that the sword doesn't sort of all of a sudden go and like get bent like that, and it doesn't look right. That's really crucial to get that sort of, any object like that should be drawn in that way. And if I'm looking back at my drawing, actually, I'll notice that actually the sword here kind of curves the other way. So I might do that instead. There we go. And I put it on a separate layer because then I can kind of resize or rotate it, replace it wherever I want. Just makes editing a little bit easier. There we go. And I think I'm pretty happy with everything. So I'm going to bring those two layers together and I'm going to drop the opacity on it. And then I'm going to start sketching a little bit more detail into this. So this is where Wacom and having a Cintiq kind of comes into this, where we've got this option of kind of different settings that we can do with a brush. So first one is I've got two different brushes that I tend to use for sketching. The first one is this basic kind of round brush, nothing fancy, but if you can see what it's doing is it goes like thick and thin and then goes a little bit lighter and darker, right? So if I put that on the right layer, you can see if I press down hard, it goes a bit thicker and darker. And if I press down lightly, it gets thin and a little bit lighter. So that's something that only a drawing tablet will do. A mouse doesn't have that opportunity for you. It's either clicked or not clicked. There's no like how hard you click will impact all of this. So you want something that has pressure sensitivity built in so that you can do this kind of like light, thin, heavy, dark, right? That's like one of the most fundamental things that you want to be able to have when you're doing this. So again, depending on the look that I'm going for, I'll use either this kind of round sketcher brush that I created and start thinking about like how I can kind of add some detail into there. So if we're thinking about, we got the sleeve in, and again, I still have a good amount of control over the sketchiness. This isn't the final line work, but it does allow me just to get that little bit of extra kind of detail in there, right? Getting that hand in like so. So hand, I'm jumping around a little bit here because I'm getting to kind of like different ideas of how to draw stuff, but effectively your hand breaks down into three parts. You've got the palm, right? So like the flat of your hand, this whole bit here. Then you've got the four main fingers, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you've got a thumb that kind of breaks off like that. Those are the main kind of three articulations of a hand. And so what I've done by drawing this thing is that guy. That's the palm. Then the fingers will kind of go out a little bit. And hands are what is probably the hardest thing to draw out there. So don't feel too bad if you're, struggling to draw hands. But yeah, that's generally how I would go about it, is just kind of getting in. Same thing down here. So we've got this kind of palm, and that can change depending on, it can be this. So it can be this with a curve, or it can be a little bit flatter. It's up to you kind of how you detail this or not. But definitely helpful to kind of start thinking about how all this works together. And so we've got that 1, 2, 3, and then it goes down into there. All right, so very, very basic hands. We've got a question from Sangram. Tips for practicing proportions. So it's a good question. Thanks for that. It's practicing proportions, I think, is basically you kind of answered your own question, where practicing your proportions is what will make you practice your proportions, if that makes sense. Like, it's about getting your eye in. It's about knowing, like, if I'm doing something like this, for instance, like if I'm drawing like a basic kind of figure, right? And I'm doing kind of that same model that I was just talking about before. Something like this. And then I'm looking at like arms here, right? So one of the trickiest things when drawing all of this is, okay, well, these legs are a little bit too short, but is it that my legs are too short, or is it that my torso is too tall? Like, there's always a kind of like a bit of a give and take when you're doing these proportions. It's like how long is a piece of string kind of conundrum, right? It's like on its own, you don't know, but compared to something else, you can tell which is the shortest and the longest, right? Similarly, like I can draw people that are like both the same height, but if I take, let's say I take this guy, let's move him down here, make him a bit smaller. If I take my drawing and do the same thing, sorry, just doing some little manipulations, and make him a little bit kind of wider, he's potentially going to look a bit shorter, right? So on his own, this character could be a little bit shorter. but then next to somebody who's the same height but skinnier looks a little bit taller. So it's not always that simple of like, oh, your head is too big or your feet are too small or whatever. It's often a thing of like, actually for the rest of your body, your hand is the right size. It's just your head is too small that you've drawn, or it's too big, or the legs are too short. So I think there's not really any easy way to learn proportions other than just like you just have to keep doing it and doing it and doing it, and eventually you'll get a feeling for like, I think that this feels wrong, and I think I know what it is. I think the head is too big or the head is too short. One of the things that you'll notice on my drawing here that I've done, if I bring this back onto here, is I'm looking at this and thinking like, oh, the head's a bit too big for this, and it probably is, but that is because I'm drawing an anime character that has hair, and anime hair is like, it's big, it's poofy, it goes all over the place, and so I've actually incorporated the shape of the skull with the hair, and that's why at this stage the head looks too big, because if I then add on hair on top of this particular shape, it's going to make the head way too big, if that makes sense. So actually what I need to think about is the shape of the head is actually probably a little bit more like, it's going to go in and do this potentially. Oops, let's get rid of that. And we're going to start thinking about cheeks and going back into there. And that's probably a little bit better for this particular like anime head. And we can kind of bring that back in a little bit and get the cheek in. Okay. Again, we're not necessarily drawing this exact character, but that's the basic idea. So you can actually see I've kind of shrunken the skull down in the box that I created. So that leaves a little bit of room for the hair in there. But yeah, continuing on with our kind of sketch, dressing this up a little bit more, getting a little bit more of that detail. Again, this is not the final pass that I'm going to be doing, right? This is just adding in that little bit of extra detail that's going to start kind of blocking out shapes. And he's wearing that big kind of not a kimono, I think it's yukata, I think it's called. Men's kimono. Can be a kimono, that's okay. And drawing that in, we got a hint of the belt coming on the other side here. That's where his kind of torso is joining up to the hips, and then that goes down in there. For a little bit of extra clarity as well, might kind of draw the other side of that kimono in there too, just to get a little bit of extra kind of room to move and kind of make that pose a little bit clearer. And when I draw in the head, it'll make a little bit more sense as well. But yeah, drawing that in, we've got the hilt of the sword there and another finger, and then oops, and then the pommel of the sword. Yep. There we go. And we can start to think about how that's gonna work in there. And getting the rest of the kind of the sword fingers. Where are we? We're looking at, I actually only really got one in there. So it's important, again, when you're doing this, so like you can never check enough with what it is that you're doing to make sure that it's like, yeah, okay, that's meeting up. Like things like, again, to come back to your question about proportions, is, you know, trying to look at stuff like, where does this hand, if I draw a line straight down from that hand, where does it kind of intersect with the arm there? And like, okay, that's pretty good. If I'm looking at the tip of this and going down, I might just change color for this one. The tip here, how far away from the foot does that come? Where does the tip of the chin line up to this guy? So looking at this and thinking about like, all right, cool. So I probably need, if I'm doing exactly this pose, I'll probably need to move my foot back a little bit. But yeah, it's often just kind of like going back to your model and kind of referencing where stuff is and how it's all kind of fitting together. So get the pants in. Got a nice big bulge there, some folds happening. I love these like samurai pants. So cool. Such cool character designs in Demon Slayer. I don't know if you guys are fans, if you guys watch it. It's pretty popular anime. If you haven't watched it, I highly recommend it. Little bit on the violent side, so maybe not for everybody, but definitely the animation and the kind of the character design and the story, absolutely fantastic. So here's another one for you guys in terms of proportions and kind of checking what it is that you're doing and how it all kind of works. This little kind of sock or like legging into the foot that I've drawn, I've actually drawn far too flat. Whereas if I'm looking at that angle is really a lot more kind of pronounced there. So that's one of those things, again, I can look at that and go like, all right, I actually need to turn this a little bit more so that it's a bit more of an angle. And then I can use that kind of reference in there. All right. I might draw the rest of his jacket, or the tail of his coat in a little bit more. Try and get that in. Maybe give him a bit of a thicker sleeve too. There we go. And then we've got that happening. And that kind of comes down. Well, it goes out a little bit further, but anyway, it doesn't, not really the end of the world if I'm not exactly, you know, emulating what's happening here and kind of being able to copy that. Because again, this is just from reference, right? So this is just a basis of like, oh, this is how this works. Get those feet in. So the feet now will become a little bit more shaped like feet and less like cheese wedges. Who wants cheese? I want cheese. Always time for cheese. There we go. Making sure that I'm kind of still aligned to what I thought I was. Yep, that's looking pretty good. All right, and then get that second foot. So that second foot's kind of funny because we can see a little bit of the heel back there. But again, if I'm following the rules that I kind of laid down before, is getting that shape and then just in there, there we go. And then we've got big toe into sandal straps. And there we go. And now I can start thinking about adding in some hair. And I think that will probably take us to the end of today's episode. So let's do some hair here. So I could kind of follow what's happening here, or I could go a little bit nuts. So I'm going to go a little bit nuts, and I'm going to start thinking about naming my layers and potentially saving my work as well. Always a good idea. And we'll call this one, I'll stick it on the desktop for now. And we'll call this one Stream Part 1. On the desktop, please. Thank you. There we go. All right, so now we save that, and I'm going to label this one as hair. Never forget to save your work. Always interesting to lose all that work that you've done. And then just quickly, I'm doing this again on a separate layer, mostly because I can then kind of make different amends and think about how that works. So let's go with like, I don't know, we can start with like super spiky kind of ruffled kind of hair and see how that kind of looks. Go real like anime crazy, something like this. That can be kind of cool as well. Don't mind that at all, actually. Can drop the opacity of the base down to see kind of how that looks. That's pretty cool. Don't mind that. Let's make a new one. Again, I'm just messing around with different things here. We can go in and say maybe they have got an eye patch. And a mohawk. Yay. Mohawks are cool. Mohawks are 80s. There we go. Mohawk and a beard. Because why not? A bearded mohawked samurai because we can. Yeah. It is over 9,000. You know, little story for that Dragon Ball reference for you guys before we end. The over 9,000 thing that Vegeta says when Goku's powering up in the OG series, actually in the OG he says it's over 8,000, but because of the way the lips moved, the English dub made it 9,000. So yeah, in the OG story it's actually 8,000, but in the dub it's 9,000 for some reason, and that is the version that everybody seems to kind of go for these days. But yeah, cool. All right, so again, we could keep going here. We could do a bunch of different kind of hairdos and see how that all kind of comes together. But effectively what we've done is we've got a good basis of a sketch. We can add some details in a little bit later. We can think about inking in the next episode, and then we can get into some color. But we've got a solid foundation using reference of a photo that we took and taking it from there. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for the questions. Thanks for watching. And I will hopefully see you guys next week for part 2 of the stream. Till then, take care and see you later.